Ken Beck actually said after he saw like Gen AI for the first time, he realized that 99% of what he knew became irrelevant, but that 10% that he had learned became 1,000 times more important.
There's a danger sometimes, even if you are pairing two persons, you will still outsource your thinking a lot to the AI.
I definitely think there's a danger in doing this. AI, at least the way they're currently trained to, they love producing code. Most of that code, sometimes, without the right guardrails, is going to be gibberish. The next programmer who comes and looks at it, they're going to go, why are we doing this? Code is read more by humans. It's meant to be read by humans more than it is meant to be run by the machine. But really what you're trying to design is for humans, and that aspect still applies.
This week on the Tech Lead Journal, meet Mohan Krishnan, a transformational leader who has transformed engineering teams at Grab, Bukalapak, and BBM Emtek.
How do you actually think about making a successful transformational engineering team?
My philosophy has always been that you wouldn't get trained by a tennis coach that doesn't himself play or herself play tennis. I think that applies to technical management as well. High-performing engineering teams are very similar to high-performing sports teams. All of this needs to be supported by a foundation of like some level of discipline, which is not something we normally associate with our line of work.
When I see tech forums within this region, people are now questioning, should I still be in tech?
I know there's a lot more focus, are we getting rid of juniors and all that? I don't fully buy into that. I think what we mean, we're raising the bar of what a junior engineer should be capable of.
Do you think the Southeast Asian engineering talents are ready for this? Hey Mohan, welcome to my next in-person podcast recording. So, I've been starting to doing this for tech leaders in at least this region, Southeast Asia first. So I'm very happy to have you. It's been a long time coming, I think. I've always been wanting to invite you. And so, here we are. So thanks for doing this.
No, thank you, Henry. I'm really appreciative of you choosing me to be on your podcast. I hope I'll be able to share something useful to your listeners.
All right. So Mohan, maybe in the beginning, I always love to ask my guests first to share a little bit more about yourself, right? What type of leader you are, and maybe looking back from your career, any highlights or, turning points that shape you as a leader today?
Yeah, I think there are definitely a couple of career pivotal points that kind of shaped me into both like maybe my appreciation for engineering and I guess you could say my leadership approach as well. The first was definitely, taking the plunge to join Pivotal Labs in Singapore in 2011, 2012. I had been working for a Malaysian startup up to then that was focused more on the logistics space, and it was good, and I was running a small team and all that. But a lot of the things that I had learned were very much self-learned. Right? So we kind of read stuff, we try to practice it. Pivotal Labs was the first organization that I joined where I learned a lot from. I'm not sure how much people will know about it, but so Pivotal Labs started in San Francisco, and then at some point they had set up an office in Singapore that was working very much the same manner, working with startups. And they are an XP shop, extreme programming shop through and through. And I had read Ken Beck's books on extreme programming before that. Right, it came out around there, so late 90s. So, I picked it up from the shelf. A lot of it looked like, wow, can you actually do this? Pair programming all the time, test-driven development. And then I joined this organization, which pretty much lived and breathed on a day-to-day basis. And it was amazing. I learned a lot there. So that was definitely a pivotal moment. Happy to talk through some of the stuff that I learned at that point. But very quickly then, I did another pivotal inflection point in my life was taking the plunge to move to Indonesia. I work for a startup. I did that with a close buddy of mine from Pivotal Labs as well, Tommy Sullivan, who's still there. Maybe one day you'll have a chat with him. And that was really an experience as well, where we had the opportunity of taking a lot of the stuff we learned at Pivotal Labs and trying to practice it in a completely different culture. Completely different is probably overstating it, but Indonesian culture is different, right? The Southeast Asian countries have their own distinct flavor, approach to work. So taking this very disciplined, focused approach to work and applying it in that, and it mostly worked. And it actually had a lot of benefits as well. So that was quite an experience as well. Lastly, also related to my time in Indonesia, I think was the BBM experience, where the company I was working for back then, Emtek, decided to make a very big investment and buy what was remaining of the BlackBerry Messenger user base from BlackBerry or RIM, but by that point it had been renamed BlackBerry. and like relaunch it in Indonesia as like a local messenger. It was very ambitious. It was a crazy idea. It involved a lot of hard work, and it was a really eye-opening experience in terms of kind of working, again, across cultures, like working with a Canadian team, working across time zones. And then there was a big technical challenge as well in terms of doing a on-prem to cloud migration to Google Cloud back then, which was also very new in the region. So that was also quite an experience, kind of like taking a bet on a new cloud provider, building relationships, understand technical problems, solving tough technical problems. Yeah, I think those three things. And then I've been very lucky, right? Like my move to Grab has been quite exciting. I've been learning a lot as well. But if I were to look back and say like, okay, which were experiences that really shaped who I am today from a career, professional standpoint, it would be those three aspects.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing this story. I know you have had long, more eventful, highlights in your career, right? So I think thanks for highlighting these three. I'm a bit intrigued by your sharing about Pivotal Labs experience, right? Because you were saying that you were immersed in the practices that they have, XP, extreme programming, maybe a little bit flavor of agile, and more on the core technical practices. These days, actually, many people get exposed a lot more on the AI tool stuff, right? So not necessarily those kind of technical practices. In fact, it's more like a shortcut, like you can ask something and it will give you the result, right? So for people who are maybe starting in their journey, what do you think still relevant looking back from your career experience, right? When you studied firsthand those kind of practices, for those people who are more AI native, so to speak, right? Is there anything that you want to convey to them such that they can have a more better way of learning?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's definitely very topical, something that we discuss a lot at Grab and with other friends as well. Ken Beck actually said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that after he saw like Gen AI for the first time, he realized that 99% of what he knew became irrelevant, or was it like 90% of what he knew became irrelevant, but that 10% that he had learned became 1,000 times more important. I'm paraphrasing here, don't quote me on it, but essentially what he was saying is that like a lot of the core skills are still extremely important, if not more important in this realm. And I agree 100% there. I think if you think about things like especially test-driven development or pair programming, and there's lots of material on this, I'm not going to repeat it, but like I think these are the type of techniques and approaches that are going to help people use AI better. I am not convinced that we're going to go full autonomous just yet. I think Andrej Karpathy talked about it in his YC Combinator talk, where he talked about this sliding autonomy, right? And I think we're very much still in a stage where AI can help us accelerate lots of work, help us with debugging, but the human's still going to be in a loop. So the question then is, how do you make that loop something where the human's providing guidance in a way that makes the AI do its job better? John Osterford actually talked about this in the Pragmatic Engineer podcast as well, where he talked about the value of good system design and system architecture will probably get increased as we try to build these AI systems, because now the role of the engineer is to kind of think about the architecture and the design. Because the incremental cost of producing code has, practically gone to zero. The question now, are you producing the right code? So I think a lot of these I wouldn't say it's old, but like a lot of these more foundational skills around system design, test-driven, like how do you apply tests to help with design? How do you think about a feedback loop where you can write some tests, write some code, refactor? These are all very fundamental thinking that actually becomes even more relevant in the AI world. So I would definitely recommend folks who are looking at this space. And yes, of course, everybody enjoys their session of vibe coding and just kind of generating these cool apps without giving it too much. And I think that's great. But I think I do agree. I think Simon Williamson also talks about this. That's a different type of coding. The type of coding that you want to do, that you want to put in production, probably is not going to be vibe coding.
Right. So definitely, from my experience as well, I can see that the value of fundamentals become much more important, simply because now, like what you said, producing code is so much easier, especially if you're junior, right? Even though you don't have much knowledge, you can still produce like so-called good code, I would say, but whether the coherence in terms of architecture, design, performance, security aspects and all that probably needs a little bit more fundamentals, right?
100%.
And you mentioned about pair programming. Many people associate AI as like my pair programmer now, and they think even like pairing with AI can give maybe the same benefit. I know that the pair programming is not just having another person or thing working side by side with you. I think it's the conversation, the social aspect, maybe the two perspectives talking to each other and getting the best idea, right? So do you think pairing with AI can give you the same benefit?
So it depends. So if you think about pair programming, there are several reasons why you do it. If you go back to the original reason Pivotal Labs did it, was they felt the best way to teach someone was by teaching them on the job. So what we would typically do is when we had an engagement, we would be pairing between a customer engineer and one of the Pivotal Labs consultant. I think that goal of pairing. I mean, of course, when you're talking about AI, you can't really teach AI. We're not at a point where these models can really take that feedback loop. So, yeah, you can write cursor rules and stuff like that, but it's very different. I think that role of pairing is a bit different. It's very relevant for organizations that are trying to upskill. So like when we were in Indonesia and applying pair programming, that was one of the main reasons why we did it as well. It was just, we could onboard someone onto a project within a week and they could be productive. Just accelerated learning and exposure. Of course, there's cultural aspects and stuff like that they need to gel with. But if they did, you could take someone who's a fresh hire and they could be committing code into production before the end of the week. They could be writing a feature and driving stuff by the next week too. Of course, complexity and stuff like that. So I think that's one aspect of pair programming. Now, I think the aspect of pair programming that is probably a place where AI can play a role is around having like a rubber duck, where you have something that you can throw ideas to and it can provide some feedback to the ideas. So for example, like maybe you have a design approach and you ask it like, hey, what about this? The AI is pretty good at coming back with suggestions. Now, not all the suggestions are going to be great. So you're still going to need to apply your thinking. But even in the programming world, there's this concept called rubber ducking, where you just have a rubber duck there and you talk to it. Of course, the AI is better than a rubber duck. So just that process of being able to have something to bounce ideas off and get feedback on is very powerful. And AI is a great way to do that. Thirdly, I think AI this also happened in pair programming, where sometimes we'll work on a project where one of the pair has maybe more domain knowledge or more technical knowledge about the space. So say, for example, we're working on a project and now we need to like go and maybe build a feature that involves some front-end work. Now, I might be more stronger on my back-end skills. I might not be so good on CSS or styling. The other person might have more skills on styling. So inevitably, what you'd have is a situation where the pairs are supporting each other to kind of get the unit work done, but also one pair is driving more when it comes to certain domains. And this is where I think AI pair programming works really well. With AI pair programming, what you see is that folks can now write code in languages that maybe they're not super familiar with. That doesn't mean they're not good engineers. They're still experienced. So they can look at the code, evaluate it, understand whether this looks like good design, good taste. But they might not know all the syntax. They might not know, okay, this is the Pythonic way of writing it. Or in TypeScript, this is what you do when you try to build this type of interface or structures. That's where AI is also pretty useful. So I think, yes, you're right. In some areas, AI can be very helpful as pair programming. Some areas, it's serving a different function.
Right. So definitely the last point that you mentioned, I experienced it myself as well. So I used to come from like heavy Java background. And then, these days there's so many exotic language. All the youngsters want to use those languages. So obviously, there's a little bit of learning curve to understand those, more exotic programming languages, right? So definitely using AI can help a lot. So one thing that I foresee, I haven't done a lot of pair programming these days, especially as I move up into more management role as well. I would say maybe the type of pair programming people do now is not a pair, but like three things, three people and then with AI. And I feel that there's a danger sometimes, maybe even if you are pairing two persons, you would still maybe outsource your thinking a lot to the AI and you kind of like wrangle the code that is generated by AI. Do you think there's a danger in doing this? And what should people do better if there is?
No, I definitely think there's a danger in doing this. You need to be conscious that the AI is just going to try as much as possible, at least the way they're currently trained today. And I use Claude for, I don't program as much as I would like to. I don't program as much actively at work, but outside of it, I do play around with this. With Cursor, I enjoy using Cursor, Claude 4, and Google Gemini. Now, the thing about these models is they love producing code. So they will produce as much code as they need to kind of answer the question and move on. And the reality is most of that code sometimes, without the right guardrails, is going to be gibberish. Gibberish not in the sense that it doesn't work, but gibberish in the sense that the next programmer who comes and looks at it, they're going to go, why are we doing this? Now, again, it's a very common thing to say, but it's definitely true, is that code is read more by humans. It's meant to be read by humans more than it is meant to be run by the machine. Now, of course, you need it. You need the machine to run it. That's how you get business value out of it. But the reason why we have so many programming languages and different things is because we are always looking for ways to express these concepts and ideas in a way that the machine can understand, which at the end of the day is like, you take it down to, microcode and you run it in the CPU after all the compilation or interpretative steps. But really what you're trying to design is for humans. And that aspect still applies. And I'm not sure if the AI models today are trained enough to have that point of view. They can definitely be guided to ensure that code is well written and stuff like that, but you need to play an active role in ensuring that happens.
Yeah.
So I think what I've seen and what I've heard and what I've tried that works is like, the work needs to be done very incrementally. Like this zero shot build an app thing, it can work. And I have to agree, it's addictive. The dopamine hit of being able to go from idea to something that you can run in a Replit window or deploy with Lovable is amazing. But yeah, I just don't know. I think it's good for zero shot, like, I need to build like a quick guest registry for my wedding, or I want to, build something to keep track of bookmarks. Like, yeah, for sure, those throwaway apps. But anything that you want to kind of build a business around and maintain, you're going to need to be more involved.
Yeah. I think it's a very important point that you mentioned, the code will still be read more by humans, even though produced by AI or no matter what, right? So in the end, someone needs to reason about the system, especially for systems that evolve, right? If, like what you said, you just need to build it once, like maybe wedding planner or whatever that is, right? Maybe you are not going to read it ever again. But if we build software that is more like evolving, serve a business purpose, I guess it will still be read a lot by human, and we should not forget the aspect that even though AI produced the code, someone needs to understand what is being written at the end of the day. The dopamine hit, I think, is really interesting that you mentioned. I personally find it very addictive as well, right? Because maybe a long time ago, we used to think like, I want to be able to solve the problem and write the algorithm myself, right? But now it's more like the objective, I think, slightly changed because of this dopamine hit. I want to write a prompt such that AI can produce the code that I want.
Yes.
I think this is also dangerous to me. So we kind of like lose the aspect of, actually producing the code, the algorithm, and the thinking process behind it, but kind of like trying to find the best prompt to get AI to produce it. So again, like, I don't know whether you feel the same. That's the first thing. And like, what should we do in order to restrain ourselves from outsourcing a lot more of these things?
Yeah, again, I don't think it's so much about one being right or wrong. It's more like, okay, what's the purpose? If the purpose is to kind of build a quick weekend app, then yeah, you should spend as much time as you can to zero shot what you want out the door. Right? I think that's great. But if what you're trying to do is build something for your professional work, or like you said, you want to build a system that's going to continue to need to evolve, right? It's not just a zero-shot system that kind of is deployed and done. Then there are lots of folks who have shared approaches. I think the one that's worked for me, and I think based on what I've read, also works for a lot of other people, is being very deliberate. Like, so spending time to first like kind of lay out a bit of an architecture or design. Of course, at that point, not producing any code, just kind of laying out what the design and architecture should look like, how you think about things, and then only producing code in very incremental fashion. So saying like, okay, now that we've figured out this is what we're going to do, let's start with this piece here. I want to build this screen, and I want a controller that will be taking these inputs, and let's also have a test for it, right? I think doing those steps in increments is the right way to do it. I've heard of some people who have been more successful with like a TDD approach with AI, so getting AIs to write the test first. I'm not as sure. I mean, my personal experience is I haven't been able to be as successful in it. As much as I enjoy TDD, I actually find it more practical for me maybe to write the test So maybe that's just more around how we think or approach things. But definitely test writing is an area where AI is very, very good at. And it'll help with a lot of sometimes the more tedious aspects of keeping the mocks up to date, updating stuff. So things that you would normally write macros to go and quickly do refactors, now you can just get the LLM to do it. Yeah. So I think more incremental, more deliberate thinking, definitely for the second category of work.
Yeah. And not to mention these days, people are building more agentic way of coding and even submitting a task asynchronously, and then they will just create a pull request that we just merge. So I think the advancement here is really rapid, I would say. Sometimes I also fear that I'm obsolete. But I think let's move on to the next segue, because I know that you have been in multiple different companies and you're kind of considered very successful, and people find you very inspiring tech leaders, right? So one aspect that I would want for us to learn is how to build that transformational engineering teams, right? So maybe, if you can, summarize a few key points. How do you actually think about making a successful transformational engineering team? That would be great.
Yeah, so first off, you're being very generous. Thank you, Henry. I think what I have been over my career is I've been very lucky to work with very capable people. So that has definitely helped. Having said that, I do have a point of view on what makes good teams. Of course, it's based on my experience, and experience will vary, right? People have different approaches for these sort of things. And it's probably also because of the pivotal labs, extreme programming type thinking. But I feel like high-performing engineering teams are very similar to high-performing sports teams. What do I mean by that? Firstly, especially when you're talking about complex engineering problems, which can't just be solved by 1-2-person teams, it's a team sport. You need all the different players. They're bringing different skills or capabilities to the field. Similarly, in an engineering project, there's going to be the person who goes deep. There's going to be the person who is very good at kind of communicating and being the bridge between teams. There's going to be someone who's able to rally people when things are down. So you need all sorts of characters in the group. A diverse set of people is important. On the back of that, of course, you have things like frank and open communication, discipline, respect, and all these sort of aspects as well, which I guess is common for most high-performing teams, whether they are software engineering or not, right? But what I think is maybe a bit more distinctive is all of this needs to be supported by a foundation of some level of discipline, which is not something we normally associate with our line of work. I think highly effective teams are disciplined. Now, that doesn't mean everybody comes in at 7 o'clock in the morning and all that kind of stuff, although that's what they did do in Pivotal. There was fixed timings of the day. It does mean, though, there are certain bars of expectation that everybody adheres to. So maybe things like, our code quality, our testing approach, how we respond to incidents. That's what I think sets the best teams apart. There are other aspects also, so when you have a high regard for engineering quality, you naturally are also aspiring each other to push your limits. That's something I felt is very important. So when you have strong engineers on the team, it lifts everybody else as well. And it creates a feedback loop. So now everybody gets better. So now people push harder to learn even more, to solve problems in an even better way. And that feedback loop of learning from each other, teaching each other, that's really important. So another thing that I think is really important is having a good mix of juniors, medium folks, and senior folks on teams. I know there's a lot more focus now, are we getting rid of juniors and all that? I don't fully buy into that. I just don't think that's a sustainable way to set an engineering team up. You can maybe do that for very small teams. Okay, I've got a very small team of just super elite engineers. Sure. But if you're talking about 30, 40, 50% orgs, you're going to have varying levels of skill and experience, and people are going to kind of go up the chain. I think what we mean when we say stuff like we're not going to hire junior engineers anymore is that we're raising the bar of what a junior engineer should be capable of. But when you raise the bar, of course, the top moves up. So the relative skills, I think, gap between these different levels will still be there. And in that, you will create an opportunity for good team dynamics of mentorship, coaching, and learning, which I think is very critical in good teams. And that's what I've seen, right? My experience is that people join and stay with teams, especially at the younger age, the more junior folks will come in, they are just more hungry. They're willing to do anything to kind of learn, especially if there's an opportunity to learn from someone who's a mentor or a coach. And then the more senior folks, maybe they are a bit more specialized, so there are certain areas that they want to kind of go deeper on, but they're more willing to teach as well, and they get a reward from doing that. So those are some aspects I feel of like highly performing teams.
Yeah, and not to mention like many people associate also software engineering like a apprenticeship model, right? Where you have someone senior coaching you, bringing along, solving problems together until a certain point where they become, I don't know, much more senior, and then they can go on by themselves as a leader, right? So interestingly, you mentioned about discipline and associate that with like sports team. I think in a physical sports team, it's very clear discipline is about, time, physical conditions. You can even measure and look at it very concretely, right? Whether you're fit, not fit, fat, or, like muscular. I think it's very easy. But for engineering team, probably it's a little bit more abstract, right? Yeah. And very hard to see. And in fact, many people try now to also measure the effectiveness of their engineering team, the productivity and all that. Sometimes it's arguable, this measure against the others. But in your point of view, if you can distill this discipline, right, what kind of things that you would measure or would you set as the high bar?
Yeah, so some aspects of it is engineering culture, like what we talked about, right? So like things like, okay, how do you like code quality, how you, which is both like in terms of like readability of your code, design of your code, testing. Also like just your entire deployment process, like how do you, like how effective are you around deployments? How does team responds to incidents or issues in production? What's the culture? Is it a blameless culture? Is it a culture of learning, right? I think another aspect that I feel really set teams apart and something that we try to instill early on when I've run teams together with the leaders is that you must instill a culture of wanting to get into the technical details. Like no issue is too deep. So, in Indonesia, we used to like to say, no magic. So what that means is like, let's say there's a bug in production and it's flaky and it sometimes happens, it doesn't happen. When we took over the team, there were some older engineers around. They'll say like, I don't know, black magic. And so we were like, no magic. Let's find out what's wrong here. Let's put in the right level of debugging logs. Let's make sure there's enough observability. Let's try to reproduce this locally. Let's try to okay, no, this is in the C code. All right, let's read through the C code. Let's get the open source version of this application. Let's look through the code. Let's see if we can modify it. Oh, you mean it's a language or framework if not used? Okay, you got 2 weeks. Go figure it out. Like, go deep. Don't stop at just the surface level. And sometimes it'll feel like, wow, so much effort. It's like, this isn't really effective. But I think that's what differentiates the teams that have the right type of rigor and discipline around focusing on their craft and really understanding how things work. Another thing is like investment in tools. I think that's another area. The discipline to kind of go like, hey, we're not just going to jump from one tool to the other tool. Like we have a tool, we're going to go deep on it, we're going to maximize it. And then if we figure something else comes along, if it's really that much better, then we'll kind of be more deliberate about it, right? So like getting really good at your tools. That's something Pivotal did really well as well. They just super invested in Rails and Ruby back then, but they got so much mileage out of it just because they were super experts and they knew how to make it do anything they needed to do, and they knew the best way to kind of build it. So yeah, I think those are some aspects that I would say separate those teams.
Yeah, so definitely culture and still kind of like the code quality aspect, the deployment aspect, the incident management aspect, the blamelessness thing, obviously, right? So I think that goes back to the culture. And I like the no black magic thing, right? Because sometimes, software in distributed systems is very hard to reason about sometimes. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think we can always find an explanation, even though sometimes it's maybe, I don't know, concurrency or some random things could happen. So I like that approach that you mentioned. The other aspect of engineering team obviously is to deliver results for the business, right? And I know that you have a few thoughts about this, like always understanding about outcomes, small team, maybe a little bit on these aspects as well when you build engineering team.
Yeah, this is definitely something that has become very much more focused for me now in my time at Grab, because I run the platform engineering teams here. And within our platform engineering teams, we don't really have too many product managers. We have, and they're helpful and they're good, and it's a growing group and we enjoy working with them. But what we typically find is the engineers need to be the ones also kind of thinking about the customer, and the customer here being internal service teams. Now, in a way, that should be easier because you should be able to understand that persona because you are that persona too. But it's interesting how hard it is sometimes for engineers to kind of put themselves in the shoe of the customer. I think there's a tendency to get very fixated on the solution. Like, oh, this is a cool solution. Oh, we can build it out this way and build it out that. And you end up in this trap of just building widgets.
Yeah.
So you got all these different widgets and like, look at all this cool stuff we've built. Now, is that really solving the problem that we set out to build, that you want to solve in the first place? And many times when you ask the engineer that, they'll go like, oh, I haven't really given it enough thought. Or they might anchor on one thing, oh, this so-and-so told me this. That's why I'm building this. And all well-intentioned, but this is where I think, really focusing more on the outcome. Like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What are the different ways to solve it? And then from an effort standpoint, how much effort we're going to put into this, and okay, will this, and then circling back again, right? So, sometimes people say it's product thinking, right? So I think especially in this AI world, the role of the software engineer and the product manager to some degree is melding, right? Like I think there's this phrase called tiny teams is becoming more popular. The latent space guys kind of popularized it with their AI World Fair. They had a dedicated track on tiny teams. And yeah, I think what that means is now that you have a system that can help you produce a code, you should be thinking more about the design, more about the customer problem. And it's definitely a muscle we would love to have more engineers build.
Yeah. I can actually see as well if the engineers having this business mindset, wanting to understand the actual problem user is facing, it's like a multiplier effect, right? They understand the technicals, but they also understand like the actual business outcomes that needs to be produced. And especially these days, you mentioned, right, tiny teams, you can kind of like outsource a lot of mundane work to something else like AI, right? I think it becomes more crucial that people don't just focus on the cool stuff, but actually solving the problem, getting the right outcome for the team. I think that's very important. And some of these actually is the kind of like the responsibility for leaders to kind of like guide them, right? And I know as a leader as well, you have a lot of experience in this area. So interestingly enough, like when people say about you, inspiring leader, transformational, a lot of things, they mention about the tough approach that you have as well, right? So tell us a little bit more about your personal style as a leader, right? How do you actually set the standards very high to the team? How do you communicate that? How do you actually train them or mentor them to become the best software engineering team that they could be?
Yeah, it's a very good and relevant question as well. We're going through our review period, so I'm sure I'm going to see a lot of feedback on stuff like this. Listen, I think, to be completely honest, I think I'm also kind of calibrating and figuring out what works best. I think a lot of like this notion of like being a strong or tough leader, a lot of it, many a times, comes from also like your experience learning. So like when I was in school and when I was in the debate team and also like, subsequent to that, my experience has always been around coaches that are kind of like sports coaches. Like, you think about sports coaches, they're also kind of like very strict, like, because it comes with the discipline and regime. That's kind of the type of teachers I've had my entire life. My most effective teachers were strong, very clear on like, okay, this is what we need to get done. This is how we're going to do it. And then if you don't do it, it's not so much like admonish you, but like saying like, no, you can do better, right? And I guess, whether consciously or unconsciously, I've kind of modeled some of my approach to that as well, to varying different levels of success, to be completely honest. Right. I think when you have this type of approach, you tend to attract a certain class of folks to join your team as well. Because people who don't kind of gel with this style, they'll leave.
Yeah.
They'll move on. Now, the good thing though, is coincidentally, it has been a good filter, I would say. I've been able to retain strong people as a result of that because they also are driven by this thing. They also want the clarity. They want the strength execution. They're willing to put in the work. I think though where it might be like a bit of not as effective, it's like, okay, can I help people be more effective? Or is this filter going to mean that you either fit into the mold or you don't? And that's where I think I'm trying to calibrate as a leader as well. Like, okay, if you don't normally gel with this style, can I calibrate my approach so that I can still make you effective, but maybe through different means? Yeah, it's a growth path for me, I think.
Yeah. In my mind as well, I mean, like, it's always hard, right? Whether you want to go hard on certain things or whether you kind of like, let the team kind of like solve it, set the standard by themselves. It's always very tough because people these days, talk about, I don't know, like giving them trust, psychological safety, they are not like a physical sports team, they're more like a knowledge worker. Yeah. It's always a tough balance approach, I would say. But when you say you had some failures stories as well, right? Like what kind of things that maybe don't work well with this tough approach towards software engineering team, right? Like what exactly that you learned from those experiences that you kind of like tweaked along the way?
Yeah, so I think sometimes when you take like a tough approach, the signal to noise ratio gets warped because people anchor a lot on how you say things as opposed to what you say. So the tough approach works really well when, it's like radical candor. Yeah. To some degree, I know the tough approach and radical candor doesn't necessarily mean the same thing, but it overlaps. Because if you're being very frank with someone, it means that if you're like frustrated with them, you kind of share the fact that the thing is frustrating you. And that sometimes is seen as tough. Now, I think for it to be really effective, you firstly need to have established enough trust that the person who's receiving the feedback knows that your intention is good. Your intention is to help them on their project. If you don't have that foundation in place, anything you say in this like tough approach will be taken as an attack to them. So you don't have that counterbalance. Now, to build that trust, though, it takes investment and time. So it requires high bandwidth communication. So I think it's more effective within like a smaller circle of people who you can establish that personal connection with and that trust with, as opposed to like a more broader, wider group. Because for the wider group, they're only going to hear the times when you make a lot of noise. They're not going to be there when you're like in the one-on-one kind of like explain, okay, this is why this didn't work out. This is why I'm frustrated with this. Or like, you tell me like why you think that way, right? Like, it's just not there. So that's where I think the calibration is required. Like just being more conscious of, okay, what message are we getting across? Is it the most effective way? Or also, I mean, I'll be frank with you, like, I think it's a lot about the ego as well. Sometimes being tough and like, grandstanding is an ego thing as well. And I'm trying to make sure that I don't fall into that trap where I myself want to say this way because it makes me feel good.
Right.
Trying more to focus more on like, okay, what is the most effective thing to be able to get the outcome we need? And that takes effort and discipline too.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely I think for those leaders who are also like kind of like contemplating the approach themselves, because I think you learn it throughout your experience, right? There's no doubt, like what you mentioned, you learn from childhood, maybe after certain years of your career, you also learn along the way. Maybe you meet somebody who teach you a different way of doing things. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer. It's highly contextual as well. Maybe sometimes the team needs this kind of more disciplined type approach. And I like that you mentioned, leaders have the responsibility to have this high bandwidth communication and building trust, right? Because you can't just, using tough approach to get the certain results. I think building the trust is definitely still one thing. And the ego aspects, I think in every kind of debate within software engineering team, right? I think there's always some kind of ego, I feel, like maybe this tech stack that you really love, or maybe this approach you really love, or whatever solutions that you think is the best way. I think putting ego aside is definitely very important. I mean, it works not just within software engineering team, I think in real life as well, I would say.
100%.
Yeah. One aspect that I see in your career that I think very unique and maybe interesting to learn from is like, there was a point in time where you go back working to Google, right? So I've seen your career, you've been like, I don't know, CTO, senior vice president, managing big, large engineering team. And then you took a decision to actually go back as an IC, right? When you go back to Google. And that was kind of like a short stint. And for many people, especially leaders who have been, in the 5th year, 10th year of their career as a manager, right? Sometimes they wish to go back as an IC, but sometimes they have so many different thoughts. Maybe if you can outline to us, like what was your thought process back then? Was it difficult for you to move back from management to IC? And yeah, maybe we start from there.
Sure, no, absolutely. It's a question that I've gotten before. Okay, so firstly, for me, was first and foremost an opportunity to work at Google. Right? I know Henry, you've worked at Google as well. I wanted to take a view of inside the Google Flex, right? Like, okay, what it is. Unfortunately, I joined during COVID, so it wasn't the best experience, but all kudos to Google. I think they did a really good job with onboarding. They went out of their way. And that was great. So the opportunity to be an IC and kind of like bootstrap and learn like, okay, what would it mean if I was like a software engineer or like back then the role was solution architect within Google. That was really alluring because I wanted to learn again. I wanted to see how these big companies do it. They've done fantastic stuff. Also just the pedigree, right? Like the ability to kind of like look through code commits from Jeff Dean or Sanjay Gamawat, or like, look through the code for Bigtable. I didn't understand a lot of it, but it was just the experience of being able to immerse that. So the IC role for me was almost secondary to the opportunity. Right. Having said that, I think the IC role was also an opportunity for me to kind of test my own skills. Like while I had been leading teams all the way up to like 2014, 2015, 2016, I was still kind of working on code as well because the team wasn't that large. We were like, when I was in Indonesia and we were probably 2014, 15, it was like a 70% team, 70, 80% team. So still below the Dunbar number. I could go in the morning, we'll do stand-up. I'll spend a couple hours pair programming. So with someone on the team. It was very common. Tommy did the same thing. Like we spent very little time in meetings because the team was firstly self-organized. We had the different touch points of the day. We'll have a stand-up in the morning, teams company-wide stand-up. So we'll have all the engineers kind of do it. Then we'll have a team stand-up and then we'll break. And, I was lucky Emtek was relatively hands-off in a good way. And they kind of just let us do our stuff. We had product team members who would work more closely with the business, and we were somewhat firewalled from that, which was great. We didn't have to remember. So I was very involved in the code up to like maybe 2014, 2015. I worked very close. Before we hired more senior people in the DevOps team, I was practically like the tech lead for the DevOps team. And then only like 2017, 2018, where I really kind of rolled off code again and was more, not actively writing code, but definitely involved in some of the technical aspects, which is kind of the role I play today as well. So going back to an IC role was an opportunity to kind of reconnect with some of that, especially given it was solution architecture. We didn't go cloud. It was like DevOps and stuff like that, which is an area that's close to my heart and something I thought I would be good at. So that was the hypothesis going in. I think a couple of things happened, some internal to Google, which is not important. But I think more externally, what I quickly realized is that I wasn't getting the dopamine hit of being able to drive a lot more outcome. I realized that my ability to kind of scale my impact as an IC was very limited. I would literally go around looking for projects to kind of contribute to, and there were some projects that I could, and it was great and it was fun. But I just very quickly realized that Google's a large organization and they have swim lanes for people and they're very happy for people, or at least I wouldn't say very happy, but the sense was people wanted to stay in their swim lanes. So in my swim lane, I had only so much to do, so much impact to drive. And my manager was okay, my managers were happy, but I wasn't enjoying my work as much. So when student got in touch with me again, he said like, okay, there's this interesting opportunity. We really want to do this. I think you'll be a good person. I had interviewed at Grab before. He said, if you're keen, you have to come now. He said, like, this role is going to be open only for a certain period of time. I was like, damn it. We were just about to have my second kid. So the Google paternity would have been great. Grab's paternity back then was only 2 weeks. But he was like, no. He was nice about it. He wanted to see how we make it work. And I was definitely keen on working on bigger problems. And for me, bigger problems, again, it's more a reflection of my skill set. I'm not saying an IC can't drive bigger impact.
Yeah.
It's just, my ability, if I look at my strengths, I think Peter Drucker says it, right? Like, sometimes people focus a lot more on their growth areas or weaknesses. But actually in your career, especially in your latter part, you should focus on your strengths and drive that up more. So kind of some of that thinking, like I realized like I'm probably stronger as like a team lead, tech lead type, engineering leader type role. And there was a big opportunity to grab, so I took the plunge.
So definitely it's very interesting to learn from your experience, right? Because there are some people who just really love hands-on and maybe can drive impact, building a scalable solution or whatever that is, right? Unique, innovative, and that could still work, right? But for some people who are born as leaders, I would say, right? So I think the dopamine hit is to actually drive impact through people, right? Yeah. So I think that is maybe one thing that we can learn from this story that you just shared, right? See what makes you tick. I mean, if you love making an impact through people, creating, business objectives or outcomes through, leading teams, I think there could be aspects that maybe suits you well in the management. And I think one thing that you mentioned about leaders and wanting to be hands-on again, right? And I know these days, it is the fear of many leaders, including me, right? Again, coming back to AI, right? So a lot of more stuffs now can be leveraged through AI. And that also means like teams getting smaller, and maybe you are required even to use AI to actually do more hands-on work. And this goes back to some of your rationale trying to be hands-on, right, in your career. So do you think it's really important for leaders these days to come back to being hands-on and, learn all these, recent technologies, advancements and those stuff?
It's a really good question. It's a question that I think I agree with you is becoming even more relevant in this AI, AI-infused software engineering sphere now. My philosophy has always been that you wouldn't get trained by a coach, a tennis coach that doesn't himself play or herself play tennis. I think that as a basic rule of thumb applies to technical management as well. Now, the tennis coach might not be as good as you in tennis, but they know techniques, they've been around long enough, they've seen enough plays, and they're also kind of like continuing to watch games to see new approaches and techniques. They're trying it out on their own. They're probably not going to go for the next Grand Slam tournament, but they're there, they're plugged into it. I think that same thing applies to technical management. You have to be plugged in. You cannot just be, maybe it's more the sphere or the space that I've been focused on, which definitely has been more on the platform, infrastructure side. But I just don't believe, I think it's hard for someone just to be a manager. Like there's a role to play, don't get me wrong, especially when there's a lot of like business contacts and like customer contacts. But then you're kind of playing a role almost like a product manager, engineering manager. And maybe for some type of problem, some type of companies that works. But generally, my preference is always to find someone who's more of a technical manager and help them build those other skills. Especially if there's already like a job function or role for someone to be a product manager. Because otherwise it just ends up like overlapping. Or they become like project managers, right? They just kind of, I wouldn't even say, I think TPMs do more interesting work, but just like a project manager. And I feel that's also not productive. So then the question is like, okay, how do you find the time, right? Especially if you're managing people. That's a good question. And I agree, it's a real challenge. If you want to do it justice, it's a real challenge. At Grab, we have like in our career ladder, we kind of say that, okay, managers, like line managers should be able to operate as the ICs on their team as well. Meaning, that doesn't mean they contribute code actively on a daily basis, but they can contribute at that level of capacity. It's a bit of a controversial statement. We've gotten all sort of feedback on it. But I think it's still the right framing. Now, what does that practically mean for a manager at that level? I think it means like, ensuring and working with your manager to ensure that you have enough time set aside to be able to review code, to participate in RFCs and all that. And if you find yourself just doing people management throughout the day, that's broken. Like, I see some people who like have this accelerated part into management. I mean, and typically these folks are very good, but they don't spend enough time doing enough hands-on work. So if you think about your career, like if you start working like, 22, 23, right? And let's say, okay, you're lucky, you can cash out at the age of 50, right? You're talking about 27, 30 years. If you've only spent, like let's say 30, maybe 35 years, right? If you're a junior engineer and then you're becoming an engineering manager within like the first 5 to 7 years of your career, how much time have you spent really building any type of foundational knowledge? I just feel it's the way, and then you're going to spend all the other time just as a manager. I just don't think it's the right way to approach these things. I think people should dedicate more time kind of building out their IC skills, or in situations where, so like my career was a bit like that. Like, I kind of spent 6-7 years as an IC, but then kind of very quickly shifted into like leading a small team and stuff like that. I think that's okay. If the team is small enough that you can still be hands-on, you're contributing. So you're doing a bit of both. It's a bit like a tech lead manager type of setup, which lots of people, and at Grab, we don't really promote it as well. And there are good reasons why it's not a great model. But if you find yourself in that setup, then I think it's still okay. So how do you kind of create these opportunities where you have enough bandwidth to still spend time being close? And then also, I think picking problems which allow you to continue to grow in that direction. So you could be a manager, but you pick technical domains or scopes that allow you to get more technical, like pushes you, and you apply your technical aspect of your skill set in that domain, and you don't just focus on the people management side. I feel that's really important.
What about those roles that is really high up, like CTO, SVP? Do you still think they need to be hands-on, picking up certain problems to chase technically, not just like people management?
I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone.
Yeah.
I think different roles and different companies vary in terms of type of problems they want their CTOs or their VPs to solve. Having said that, I think it depends on the individual again, right? And the problem. So a lot of it comes down to the company. So for example, when I was hired into Buka, there was a very clear mandate. Okay, Mohan, you come in, we need to migrate from on-prem to the cloud. So my mandate coming in was the technical mandate.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to get this stuff done. And there was this new cloud that nobody had ever used. It was a team that was used to only managing stuff on-prem before. Okay, so there was both a social aspect, but there was also a technical aspect that needed to be brought together and solved. So I think CTOs or VPs, that's kind of the type of problems you're solving. So you need to have enough technical knowledge. You need to be able to answer the question like, okay, what are skills that maybe before this my team had, that now they're going to need to have? What does that mean practically? Because otherwise people can come and just like gas you, right? They'll come and say like, oh, this is too hard. It's going to we need to hire 5 more people to be able to do this. And you're going to go like, how do I question this person, right?
Yeah.
So I think within like those capacities, you need to be close enough to be able to put forward a credible counter-argument or review what is being shared with you. And not just kind of rely on proxying out. Because there's a T in the CTO, right? There's technology officer. That's going to mean something.
Right. For some people, I don't know, like you mentioned a few practices that I don't know whether you are still doing it now, like reviewing code, reviewing PR, for example, pair programming with them, or maybe chasing a certain particular bug during incidents, right? Some people will treat this, especially if you are like a higher up management, treat it as a micromanagement. Yeah. So what is your view on this?
No, listen, I think if you have a structure in place, let's say, for example, you're a CTO of a 400% org. Yeah, I don't expect you to be sitting down and reviewing the MR. But I expect you to be sitting in the team post-mortem review and providing feedback. I expect you to make sure that your delegates are ensuring that the bugs are being closed. And I expect you to understand the root causes, maybe through the post-mortem review, of why maybe, this thing has been happening again and again. Is this because this team has taken on too much technical debt? Like forming more strategic views on top of this. But like this strategic lens can only be built on the details. So you're absolutely right. You shouldn't be micromanaging, but that doesn't mean you don't know the details. AWS has this leadership principles. Yeah. My favorite of all the leadership principles is leaders dive deep. I feel that really sets the tone of the type of leaders, right? So the leaders dive deep, they're auditing, they are balancing like data with anecdotes, they're doing the investigation. I agree with you shouldn't be micromanaging, but there's lots that you can be doing that's not within the realm of micromanagement, especially if you have people who are already empowered to do, some of the more ground level details. And by doing it this way, you're setting the tone for the team. So you're saying like this is important enough for the CTO to be aware of. And I think that really matters to setting the right engineering culture.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you mentioned, right? Setting the right bar, right? Because if you actually don't understand the technical details, definitely the bar will be just low, right? And I like what you mentioned, right? Comparing data versus anecdotes. Sometimes when you're higher up, you can just hear anecdotes, right? People talk about certain things, maybe through proxy, maybe even directly, right? Because they don't know the actual problems. And I think having leaders that actually understand the details, right? Dive deep, is really crucial, especially in the technical team, right? No matter whether you are higher up there or not.
100%.
Yeah. So maybe I want to set aside time as well for us to talk, because you have been leaders within this Southeast Asian region. You know, you've been managing team in Indonesia, Singapore now, maybe Malaysia, back to where you were from, right? Yeah. And maybe a little bit Vietnam and so many different countries. One unique thing about Southeast Asia is all these different countries have very unique culture. Different languages as well, different working practices and things like that. And now coming to the advent of AI, right? So many people talk about AI. Do you think the Southeast Asian engineering talents are ready for this?
Yeah, it's definitely a topic very close to my heart. As you know, and this is one of the reasons why I enjoy working at Grab, because Grab is totally Southeast Asian first, and we're plugged into it, and we have engineering teams across the region, which is exciting. So let's talk facts. I think from a pure raw talent capability, we're there, right? Like if you think, we have the potential. You know, Southeast Asia, they just had the ASEAN conference in Malaysia 2-3 weeks back. Singapore PM was there, our Malaysian PM was there. They talked about Southeast Asia collaboration, right? And then they kind of shared some numbers. So I think Southeast Asia in total is like 700 million people. Still pretty young, demographic-wise. By total size of the economy, I could be wrong here, but like maybe 5th or 6th in the world. The trick though is it needs to be seen as a whole. The strength is when we can figure out how to collaborate as countries, leveraging our different strengths, right? If you are taken apart individually, all bets are off. That's my sense. Even Singapore. Singapore, I think, is probably definitely on the forefront. I mean, that's part of the reason why we're both here, right? I think the quality of the institutions, the schools are there, right? Like the amount of folks. I'm sure if you go and look at research papers and you kind of look at where you'll find lots of folks who did their either undergraduate or masters or PhD in Singaporean institutions. And you'll find folks who are from all across Southeast Asia as well, right? Like you have lots of Malaysians doing stuff here, lots of Indonesians, right? It'll be great if we can build more local entities that are really harnessing all this different talent and applying them on more complex problems. Of course, Grab has a role to play here. I won't speak on behalf of Grab, but I think we have definitely been trying to do more of that. Other large regional companies like SEA, I think, is also doing some interesting stuff. I don't know, have you seen any other regional company doing some interesting stuff?
I mean, back then when there used to be a lot of investment coming to Southeast Asia, tech startups are booming. I can see a lot of investments, but these days, the situation is quite tough, right? And everyone having layoff, maybe outsourcing to different countries for whatever reasons. Maybe it's talent, maybe it's pay or whatever that is, right? And I just see us in Southeast Asia is a bit tough in terms of situation. And when you mentioned about collaboration, I don't know whether it's happening now. I would say even people are putting them back into silos, right? Yeah. Maybe focusing more on the country rather than collaborating with each other. And what can we do as a tech community? Probably that's one question, which is also sometimes I think about Tech Lead Journal, right? How can I serve this mission of building, upskilling the tech talents within the region, right? So maybe in your view, how can we approach this as a tech community, right?
Yeah. So I think the regional tech players have a role to play. So like the Grabs, SCAs and all that, right? Like we really need to be looking at how can we create the opportunities for, really high potential talents to come and join and solve deep technical problems. From my experience kind of at Grab, I think the quality pool is there. Coming out the gate, we have high potential individuals. It's just subsequent to that, can we give them the right opportunities to continue to grow and stay within the region? I mean, I think government has a role to play here, right? Like, how do they set up the right type of investment structures so that companies, regional companies, can kind of invest and build talent in other countries, but also kind of somehow accrue it back to the country that's supporting that investment. So some type of like multilateral Asian framework needs to come out of this. I don't think we're going to be able to solve this individually. And then I think the regional tech companies have a role to play. Lastly, I think also the schools, the institutes have a very important role to play. Like, we need to be better plugged into the industry. I think things are improving. Like, I look at the internship programs that we have, Grabs has in Vietnam, in Malaysia, and even in Indonesia. And it's much better than what it was maybe in 2012, 2013, when I was also looking at it closely. And giving people, so like, for example, Waterloo University in Canada, it's common for a software engineer, a CS graduate there to have like 4, 5 internships. And they kind of learn so much through the process. Why can't we have something equivalent here? I think partly it's the companies, like we need to have the right mindset, but I think this is where the institutes can go to companies and say like, okay, this is what we're hoping, these are the type of programs we're hoping to create for our students. Are you guys willing to kind of engage at the same level, right? No point getting an intern who then comes in and like does not, like just pushes paper, that's pointless. So those are some things I think that will need to change. And this is where like some type of collaboration, I think, is going to be key. Again, I want to emphasize the point that like I have been impressed by the quality of people coming out the gate. Now it's really a question of how do we create the right opportunities.
Right. You also mentioned one thing very interesting, right? Because I've been also thinking about this and trying to find observations, right? This region seems to lack a little bit of deep technical problems and challenges probably. And that's why maybe more people, going out to other countries, US maybe, or even China these days. And even if we just observe, right? Like for example, AI, right? There are not many people building AI solutions within this region. There's lack developer tools, kind of a product being built around here. And you mentioned talent is there actually. So what is the gap actually for us to actually, bridge to that stage where we want to invest deep into these kind of technical challenges as well? Or is it just difficult for us to have this kind of opportunity?
So first off, so I agree, it's definitely a problem, but it's not just a Southeast Asia problem. If you look at it, like outside of like the China and US, maybe some small parts of Europe, like Mistral in France, the AI like agglomeration of companies are very concentrated, right? So I think it's a more wider problem, but it's definitely pretty acute in Southeast Asia as well. Again, I think it comes down to opportunities, right? And investment. Investment to be able to do something like a foundational model is huge, as everybody really well knows. And that itself means that only in I think within the region, it's only governments that can really fund this type of things. Now, the challenge then for government to kind of fund these things is what's the ROI? And it's a good question to ask because there's no point just doing these things for the sake of doing them. Yeah. That's one dimension. Where we've been very good at is more on the consumer app side. Like what you're saying, right? So less on the deep tech side. But what is hopefully going to happen is there's going to be a confluence. So as we work out what type of use cases AI is really good at, and we bridge it back to solving customer problems, these two worlds will converge again, where solving consumer problems via AI will just be the norm. Today, I think we're still at an early stage curve where we're almost looking for problems to solve with AI. But we're shifting, right? Of course, there's the coding use case, which is pretty clear. And then there are going to be other use cases as well and that will kind of blend into more clear ROI and we'll be able to get there. But it'll take a bit of time and it'll take us kind of fixing some of the fundamentals. But that's the only way to do it, I think. We need to merge this consumer app problem or consumer space problem back with the AI problem. The use cases need to become clearer.
I mean, anecdotally, when I see, tech forums within this region, people are now questioning, should I still be in tech? Should I still study computer science? Should I now thinking about something else? And for tech leaders as well, should I now think of, I don't know, moving to some other industries? In your view, right, as a tech leaders and also being hands-on with this AI thing these days, Do you think we should start thinking that way, or do you think we should even double down on this?
It's a good question. I'm opinionated about this. And of course, this is my opinion. Right? For sure. I'm not so like, I think it depends on what motivates you. If you took up computer science, or if you're in this space because you want a good salary, there's nothing wrong with that. It is a completely human and logical thing to do. Then yes, you might question these things, because I think salaries are going to be depressed. I think there's going to be a correction. There's been overhiring, there's going to be more layoffs, there's going to be efficiency gains that come out of it. But if you are in this space because you enjoy what it means to build good software, you're in it for the craft, you care about what you do, you should keep doing it. Because if anything, those things are what matters even more now. And this has been true all this while. It's just that in the past, the value was more on the generation of code. Can you get this stuff done?
Yeah.
So then someone who didn't really care about it, but did enough work to kind of cut a website, get it out, build something quick for an agency, that was still valued. What you're seeing is all of that value is going almost to zero now, right? We talked about zero shot, like image generation, website generation. So now those people who are kind of operating, I think, at that level, they are feeling this existential threat. Maybe the answer to them is, if this is what you want to do in software engineering, then there might be better ways to make money. Now, of course, this is going to be displacing people. There's going to be, economic costs around retraining and stuff like that. So I'm well aware of all those things, and I don't think we should take these sort of things willy-nilly. There are real ramifications to some of these things. But personally, I think that's probably the direction we have to go.
Right.
So, in other words, to answer your question more directly, I think if you care about software engineering, you should double down on it. But if you're just looking for very efficient ways of accruing wealth or earning a paycheck, maybe there might be other ways to do it.
And I think we have kind of like discussed it earlier as well, right? I mean, the standards would definitely elevate, right? Yeah. So for those of you who are just doing, mundane tasks, generating code through hand by hand, right? So I think those skills probably will be, lesser valued. And I think I like the point that you mentioned, that Ken Beck mentioning, right? A good software engineer, the 10%, right? The skills that you actually have will actually be amplified in this era. Yeah. And I still think, I'm betting as well, myself, that hopefully with all good talents in software engineering that we have, right, those 10% can still be valued in the market, right? 100%. And just double down on that aspect rather than the 90%, which is probably the more mundane stuff. Yeah. So I'm very well conscious about the time as well, Mohan. So as a tradition in my podcast, I only have one last question. I call this the 3 technical leadership wisdom. Think of it just like advice that you want to give us to the listeners, right, as your last advice. So what would that be?
I think for people starting out early in their career, go wide. Don't try to specialize too quickly. Be willing to pick up anything. Look more for the opportunities to learn, either by taking on challenges that are going to stretch you and grow you, or by finding the right coaches or mentors to learn from. That's something I'd say. I think for people maybe in the middle stage of their careers, this is a great time to become more hands-on, to learn stuff. I think, again, quoting the venerable Ken Beck, he said this is the most fun he's been having in like a 50-year software development career. Can you imagine 50 years software development? That's amazing. So I would definitely recommend people get back to your roots. Find time on the weekends if you can't be during office hours. Carve a bit of time out. Spend some time here and there. As we discussed, these tools are really good at giving you what dopamine hits, right? You get a really good high ROI. So find the time to kind of go in deeper. Yeah.
So it's been a pleasure. So I think we learned a lot, right? And especially looking from your perspective, right? Like what makes a great leader? How do you build a great engineering team? And we touch on also like how do we approach this AI thing, right? That is happening in the software engineering team, and going back also to the Southeast Asian talents, right? So I hope all the listeners here can learn from this conversation. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Henry. I really appreciate you enlisting me for your podcast, and hopefully this was useful for folks.